Welcome back to Practically Creative with Melissa. Today I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to make a tote bag from a art piece that I have floating around the sewing room, and we're just going to jump right into it today. So let's go over to the sewing area and let me show you what we're doing. I've taken this little art piece that I created, and I'm going to cut 3 pieces that are the same size as my little art piece. Let's see, let's go right there. And then right across the top. When I made this, I wasn't sure what I was going to do with it. So I decided today that I was going to figure that out. And so far I have 2 pieces for the lining and the front. You can tell I'm being really technical with my measurements. I just want it to match. So I'm going to come over here to this side. I'm going to cut through all 4 pieces so that they are all exactly the same width and height. There's my boo-boo. So now that we have these this way, I'm going to put a front and a back together. And then I'm going to put these 2 pieces together. Muslin doesn't really have a right side and a wrong side, but this is just a quick, simple tote bag anyway. And then I want to do one more thing here. I want to put a pocket on the outside. Of my tote bag. So I'm going to fit a piece of fabric and sew a hem. And this little pocket and the reason I'm putting a pocket on the outside is so that there's a place for my telephone, for wires, anything like that that I need to carry back and forth. And this is probably going to be the simplest tote bag ever. So there's that. And then I have this little bit of blue that was left from something else. And I'm just going to turn it into straps. So cut it in half. I'm going to make it about 2 inches wide. And I'll turn on my iron while we sew up the outside edge of this pocket. Still trying to get used to the knee lift on this machine. The iron got hot fast today. So let me iron these 2 up real quick. And I'm going to make the simplest straps ever, because this isn't going to hold lots of weight. I'm going to fold them in half. A little heat. And then I'll fold the straps in half to the center. And since it's just a little short strap, I'm not going to pin. I'm just going to use my iron, and then I'll fold them over so those outside edges meet. One. Let's sew the other one. And you can do this, you know, as a couple of different operations if you want. Fold one to the center, iron it down, fold the other one to the center, iron that side down. And then fold your edges so they meet one another. Once you've done it a few times, it'll be a super easy process. And I cut mine at 2 inches wide to start with. And at the sewing machine, I'm just doing 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. And about a 2 stitch length to sew up these handles. Not really going super fast. And if your little handles get a little bit out of line, just line them back up while you're sewing. And I've set my jazz so that the needle is down as I go. I'm using my knee lift with my presser foot. Pull that out, snip our threads. I am, as always, using my little surgical snips. Okay. Now the next step is to take the back of our bag, and I want to baste this pocket onto it. So all that means that I'm going to do is I'm going to take the pocket and I'm going to sew a very quick, very shallow seam allowance around the outside edge just to keep the pocket where I want it to be. And I could use a longer stitch length here if I wanted to, because this one's not going to be seen. I'm probably going to use about 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch seam allowance on the tote. So I just want to stay out there just so the two edges match. Then I'm going to turn, go down the bottom. Gotta get used to the knee lift. Okay, so now that that's done, I'm just gonna snip that thread. And then we're going to take our front and our back, and we're going to pin them together. I'm going to match the upper edges here. And the bottom corners. You put as many pins in as you need. This is about your sewing, and you want it to do what you need it to do. And I was talking about seam allowance. I think I have decided on 1/2 inch. And I'm not going to sew a seam at the top until I get everything else put together. And I'm doing about a good 1/4 inch seam allowance, just a straight line. I just want to make sure that I'm on the outside of that seam that I sewed to base the pocket on. Quite honestly, I'm using my presser foot as my guide. Back stitching just a hair. Because I want to be able to turn this side out. And I'm not trimming corners because I'm boxing the corners when I get done. So I'm turning the tote bag right side out, because the next thing I want to do is I want to sew my little handles onto my bag. And it'll be a small tote bag, but I don't have a problem with that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to look, where do I want my handles right now? And I think I want them about like that. I'm going to pin that handle in place. Could actually go out just a hair further and do 2 inches from the edge of the bag. I'm usually just an eyeball it kind of person, so don't hold it against me. And then that one, I want to make sure that handle's not twisted. Line that one up and pin it. You'll notice I left about a 1/2 inch of the handle sticking up there. That's for stability and to make sure that I can line it up with this one. Once again, I want to make sure my handle isn't twisted. And this time, it's actually more important to me that my handles match. So I'm going to go ahead and put that one so it lines up with the first one. And again, I don't want to twist in my handle. I'm going to line it up with the second one. It's a little far up. Let's go. And then just real quick, I'm going to sew and baste the handles onto the bag. I know, I didn't use the knee lift. So I want to get as close to the edge as I can. And I want to give myself a little wiggle room, making sure everything's straight. I am sewing back and forth over it. These stitches aren't going to get pulled out for any reason. So that extra little bit of stability will be helpful. And then I'm going to do this side. Still want them to be straight though. And I could take the extension table off my sewing machine. But I don't think it's necessary to do that. Okay, so now our handles are on. You can trim these up a little bit if you want, but I don't think it's necessary. Now we're going to sew the bag lining. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew down both sides and leave myself an opening at the bottom so that I can turn the bag out once I have it all put together. So let's do it this way. Start here. We'll start at the top on one side. I'm going to put a slightly wider seam allowance on the inside of this than I did on the outside of the bag, just so that my lining will fit tight inside my bag. So instead of using a 1/2 inch, I'll use, 5/8 of an inch instead. I'll leave myself a generous opening here at the bottom to be able to do this. And I'm not going to cut the thread, I'm just going to slide it over. Make sure everything is still lined up. Forward, back space a little bit. And I'm not so worried about back spacing. Back stitching, I can't believe I still call it back spacing. Not so worried about back stitching at the bottom corner because I'm going to box these corners. I am going to back stitch right there. Pull this out. Alright. And then I'm going to cut the threads off where I sewed this, or where I left myself the opening. And as always, I'm covered in thread. Okay, so the way you put this together is you have your bag turned right side out, the outside of your bag. And I am going to push my corners out a bit because I don't want to fight with that after I get this turned out. Here's my pocket, and I've got my bag turned right side out. I have my lining turned inside out, and I'm going to put it so that the right side of the outer part of the bag faces the right side of the inner part of the bag. And I am making sure that my handles go down inside of here and that everything is lined up straight. By everything is lined up straight, I want my seams to match, and I'm using pins because I don't have clips close by right now. And I'm going to put a pin at that seam and a pin at this seam, and I'm going to nest the seams. So that means I'm going to turn the seams on the inside one direction and on the outside a different direction, and still make sure they line up. And then if your bag is bigger, or if you feel the need for a bit more stability, you can put some pins over here close to where your handles are. I don't recommend pinning through the handles just because it's tough, but to make sure that the top edges of your bag still match up. So see how I've got the top of the bag matching? The handle's still sticking up, but the top of the bag matches. And I'll do the same on the other side of the bag. Okay. And then I'm just going to go around the top of my bag. I'm going to do probably a little more than a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And I'm going to sew from the inside of the bag because I have white thread on the bottom. And I'm just going to start wherever. I'm not going to back stitch because I'm going to come right around and sew right over that same area. And because I put my pins on the outside of the bag, I have to reach under it to sew this in. I am sewing. And there's my pen. I'm going to take my pen out. And I'm just kind of flattening the bag as I go. Give myself a back stitch right there. Make sure that everything stays straight. That pen out because you don't want to sew over your pins. Little back stitch over my handle there. There's my pen. I can feel it. I've got my fingers on that seam so that it doesn't move. And I can back stitch over the seam. There's a pen right there, and I don't want to sew over the pen. And now we've got our bag all sewn all the way around. Now, before I turn the bag right side out, I want to finish turning it wrong side out. And that's because I want to box my corners. And to box the corners, I want to take all the corners and pull them all the way out. bulk out of the way so I can do this easier and show you easier. You're going to pull on either side. So that your seam lays flat here at the bottom. And then I'm going to do probably right here by eye. You can measure it. That's probably about 1.5 inches that I'm going to cut. But I'm going to show you my cheater way to do this. Start sewing in the middle. And back up. That gets that seam flap out of your way. And I always do backspace on this. Got my threads. And give myself about 1/4 inch. So I cut about 1/4 inch there and left 1/4 inch seam. Then I'm going to box the opposite corner. Again, I'm just going to trim a little bit of that bulk out of the way so I can do this easily. And you want to make sure that the seam here is going the same direction. So when you pull this apart, hands aren't wanting to do it today. Make sure that your seam lays down the same direction as it did the first time. Lay this out flat. And then how I like to do it is I take this piece that I cut off and I use it as my guide for where I'm going to sew at. I don't have to start that one in the middle because the seam is laying the direction I want. And then cut that piece off. Now go down to the other end and you're going to do the same thing. This end should be a little bit easier because it doesn't have that pocket or extra stuff in there. And all I'm doing is I'm going at the corner. I'm laying my seam down. It's called boxing your corners. You've probably all done it. And I just want to lay that seam down flat. I'm going to use my little piece from before to measure. And making sure that it's flat, not that there's no folds in it. Okay. Once again, do the other corner. Probably don't have to worry about cutting off that bulk so much because there's no pockets or extras down here at this end. I'm just going to make sure everything is laid out flat, that I'm only sewing what I want to sew, so that's flat on both sides. And right about there. And I did back stitch, backspace. I almost said it wrong again. And then I'll cut my little end piece off here. Okay. Now, I've got all the corners boxed. corners boxed, I still have an opening at the bottom here. And I'm going to reach all the way through and grab that corner, and I'm going to pull it up and out. Then I'm going to flip my corners on the bottom of the bag in. There's my boxed corners on the inside of the bag. Here, my boxed corners for the outside of the bag. Everything is laying well. And now I'm going to push the liner down into the bag. Yes, I know there's a hole in the bottom, but I want to make sure that everything fits before I have to turn anything right side out. So there's my little bag, and I am going to take it over to the iron bag, and I'm gonna give it a quick iron. The hole's still not sewn up. I want to give it a press and make sure that everything lays flat, and I want to sew around, I want to top stitch around the top edge. The iron's on fast heat today, yay! And I'm just going to take the iron and go right inside the bag. I want to iron it so that that lining lays down inside and there's no wrinkles anywhere. It's a muslin bag. It's going to be wrinkly, but I want to give it just a little heat. Okay, and now that we've ironed it down in there, I'm going to go ahead and go back over the sewing machine one last time, and I'm going to do a 1/4 inch seam all the way around the top. And once I have the top hemmed or seamed, then I'm going to pull the inside of the bag out and sew up that bottom seam. Now, I'm making sure that everything's back out of the way at the bottom. And I want to do a very thin seam allowance here. And it's probably a good idea to go slow because you are going through, especially when you get to those straps, you're going through several layers. And what I'm doing is I'm just sew a little bit, flatten it out a little bit. And it's not a very big bag. If it was a huge bag, we might be doing something different, but since it's just a little tote bag, I'll just do it this way. Making sure that bottom stays out of my way. And I'm going over my little straps. My bobbin thread is not wanting to let go today. Alright. Now that that's all sewn up, let's bring that bottom piece up. I'm making sure that the raw edges are folded inside. And you can hand sew this. I don't hand sew. Arthritis has decided that that's not in my wheelhouse anymore. So I am going to backstitch at the beginning and then just sew over the seam. Snip my threads so I don't have to deal with them in my bag. Push it all back down inside of there. I'm going to tuck all my corners so they match. And the way I did that with the slightly bigger seam allowance means that that lining fits all the way down in there without any issues. And I'm going to give it one more little iron just so it's ready for its close-up. Here's our little bag with its boxed corners. It's got a little pocket on the back. This was done with a coloring page and freezer paper applique. I taught that on a live with the guy who sews a while back, and I've also got videos on freezer paper applique. But you could take any picture and turn it into anything you want. I happen to like this little bag. I'm always carrying my drink back and forth, cameras, etc. So I thought it would be kind of cute to turn this into a little bag. To use for that. Thank you for watching. You have a great day.